This video has very kindly been sponsored by Hoyoverse. Jing Yuan is the esteemed Arbiter General of the Xianzhou Luofu. He is renowned as the Divine Foresight, a genius strategist with a lazy sleeping lion aesthetic. He's definitely a fan favorite, and for good reason, but you might notice there's not many who actually talk about his history to make cohesive sense of it. So that's what I plan to do with this video. For context, this video is being created during patch 2.4, where stakes are high, the future uncertain, and the past still incomplete. So this video will likely require a part 2 sometime in the future. For now, I aim to document the history of Jing Yuan and provide a few other small insights here and there into his design. Let's begin at the beginning, with his birth sometime before the year 7279. He was born into a family that served the Realm Keeping Commission for generations, and when he was born, they put him through a Foxian tradition of picking from various objects and toys around an infant and having them choose their future career path by grabbing an item. His parents had hoped that he would choose to be a scholar or continue their legacy as an official of the Realm Keeping Commission, but instead, he grabbed the toy sword. Now's the best time to talk about the name he was given, though it's unclear if this is his birth name or one he was given later. The name Jing Yuan can be interpreted in a few ways as each character has multiple meanings. Yuan is the easiest. This character is most commonly associated with currency, but its origin from Oracle bone script actually means the head of a person. This evolved to mean the head of a group, like head of state. Additionally, it also can mean origin or source. Jing, on the other hand, is a bit more complicated. Functionally, in most contexts, it's used to describe scenery, especially when in conjunction with another character. For poetic purposes, Jing refers specifically to the sunlight that illuminates the scenery, allowing you to perceive 3D depths in objects. Through this meaning, it carries associations with yin and yang, because the existence of this light causes shadow in equal measure, and this description of light and shadow on the surface of objects, such as mountains, is a common way to describe the balance of yin and yang. On that topic, Jing can also mean large, like a large mound. Combining these meanings, you can interpret Jing Yuan's name in several ways. You could say his name means big head, or opt for something more eloquent like bright leader. You could also get specific and read his name meaning as the origin of light and scenery that creates shadows, for a more complete yin-yang theme. Chinese names often have multiple meanings intentionally, especially fictional characters, so these can be considered equally true interpretations. I actually like the choice for this name because Lan is often associated with the sun, and the emanation of the sun is sunlight, so it's a very suitable name that was carefully selected by Hoyoverse. But that's not all. Jing Yuan also refers to a specific reign of a specific ruler during China's Three Kingdoms period. I cannot stress enough how much corruption and political shenanigans were going on, but because his name refers specifically to the reign of this puppet emperor, and there's virtually no way this was unnoticed by Hoyoverse, I am deeply, deeply suspicious of the way that the Luofu had been run behind the scenes, but I digress. Anyway, back to the young Jing Yuan who selected the toy sword. He did indeed grow up to become a warrior against his family's wishes, opting to join the academy, from which he graduated, and he then officially joins the Cloud Knights as a boy. He meets his master, Jing Liu, and takes the oath, as clouds that cover the heavens will the knights protect the Xianzhou and soar eternal. For a little bit of context, the Cloud Knights were formed when their valiant heroes sacrificed their own body during a deal with the Flint Emperor in order to gain enough power to sever the ambrosial arbor and disconnect it from the attacking Moldrasil. You can see this referenced during the psychic visions that the Flint Emperor forced on Bai Heng, where she sees the army of soldiers radiating fiery death from their bargains with this He Liu Bai, and she then hears the words, "Take this oath and keep it forever." This hero is the person they believe to have ascended to become Lan the Hunt, though it is technically unconfirmed if that's true. The first time Jing Yuan meets Jing Liu, the young but devious child asks Jing Liu, "Master, why do you insist on wielding a sword? There are thousands of weapons out there that can kill an enemy. If you want to destroy that planet, the Jioming can probably do it with its artillery." To that she says, "This is like asking a poet why they write poems. There are many ways to express oneself, but this is the only way for me." We see Jing Yuan training hard for years under Jing Liu using a sword. About him, she says,
"I wouldn't say he's a natural sword master. But being gifted shouldn't be a determining factor when choosing an apprentice. Mentors who place importance on natural talent either lack the skills to teach or seek to take credit for their apprentice's easy success. Fame, background, none of those matter. I will teach my techniques to anyone willing to put their heart into them.
When he's a little older, he encounters the Mara Struck for the first time alongside Jing Liu.
Master, he doesn't recognize us.
So it is with the Mara Struck. To become stricken with Mara is to be a long-life species. If I too become stricken in times hereafter, you must not hold back.
Yes, Master.
He takes this to heart, having learned the effects that Mara can have on the mind. He takes his promise to his master during the scene very seriously too, even though it pains him. Also note that by this point he seemed to abandon the way of the sword and instead taken up the glaive, as is popular among the Cloud Knights. It should be around this time that he goes on his first expedition. The Navis Astraja that was carrying the troops had to make a forced landing on an ocean planet infested by abominations. And a new kind of long-life species called the puppeteer jellyfish was hijacking the minds of the Cloud Knights and nearly succeeded in taking over the ship. But it was Jing Yuan who realized what was happening and devised a way against them. His brilliant strategizing amidst the chaos let the crew identify the real enemies from their friends, defeat their foe, and return home safely. This bloodless victory showed his mettle to the generals, and after returning to the Xianzhou, he was appointed a position of importance in the Cloud Knights. This is likely when he became General Teng Xiao's lieutenant. His quick-witted and practical approaches had repeatedly given his superiors unforgettable surprises and headaches. In the end, Jing Yuan was invited by his master Jing Liu, the Luofu sword champion, to join her team alongside the Yaoqing pilot Bai Heng, the Luofu high elder Danfeng, and the Luofu furnace master Yingxing. And so, the High Cloud Quintet was formed, in response to the denizens of abundance gathering a massive army to attack the Xianzhou Luofu. On his relationship with Jing Liu, he expresses feeling always distant from her.
She taught me the skills of the blade, but we never became close. In an endless night, there was nothing closer than the bright moon, always hanging in the sky.
At some point, Yingxing creates the legendary Starfall Reverie, a magnificent guandao. The name comes from a Chinese poem about the passage of time and the desire to be free of their life as a working official and enjoy their life as a normal person. The line from the poem used is specifically this section, which means sparks struck from stone, body in a dream. This alludes to Buddhist philosophy that life is fleeting and like a dream. This poem is also directly referenced on the back of Dan Heng's coat, with the full quote meaning something like, "Why meaninglessly toil for superficial wealth and fame? Like the white horse dashes through a gap, sparks struck from stone, the body in a dream." Speaking of Dan Heng, the guandao is said to have been invented during the Three Kingdoms by a man named Guan Yu, and his legendary weapon was called Azure Dragon Crescent Moonblade. Considering Danfeng was the person closest to Yingxing, and it was designed with his azure color and named after the poem describing Danfeng, it's fair to say this weapon was designed in Danfeng's image. Yingxing says there was a boy who kept bickering with him, yet the moment the youth saw the devastator glaive, referring to Starfall Reverie, the youth grabbed it and never wished to part with it. It's not clear if it was gifted to him or if he stole it, considering he was described as a devious youth and was bickering with Yingxing. Either way, Starfall Reverie ended up in the hands of Jing Yuan, where it has remained ever since. As part of the High Cloud Quintet under the command of the General Teng Xiao, Lieutenant Jing Yuan is partially credited with endless feats, including driving the Borosin from Thalassa, destroying alliances of the Wingweavers, and rescuing the Yuchue from the living planet Ketu Mirage that was summoned by the denizens of abundance. He's depicted drinking with the High Cloud Quintet, and Blade says they drank to drown their sorrows. Danfeng's point of view says he would chat and laugh with Danfeng, at least on ordinary weekdays, and his voice line while visiting the Express implies Danfeng was someone who took care of them, just as Dan Heng takes care of the Astral Express crew. For Jing Yuan's relationship with Bai Heng, we unfortunately don't know very much except that he was comfortable enough with her to tell her to let Yingxing and Danfeng off the hook for frowning instead of smiling along with the rest of them. He does describe her as being a mutual friend of Jing Liu's. At some point, there was a dark prophecy about them that hinted at depravity and betrayal among the 5 members. After less than 100 years, Shuhu attacks, and while Danfeng has transformed into a dragon to battle him in his sanguine abyss, Baiheng, just like the Cloud Knights of legend, gives herself up to use the power of a dark sun. She implodes Shuhu, herself, and everything nearby, grinding them all into fine dust. The death of a member forces the High Cloud Quintet to have disagreements among the different races concerning the nature of life, and the group disbanded. Details on exactly what happened are still ambiguous with no reliable source, so I'll skip the explanations, but we come to the events of the sedition of Imbibe de Lune. The Cloud Knights team up with the Vidyadhara preceptors to assault Danfeng and his companion Yingxing in the Scale Gorge waterscape. His actions were a threat to the sacred wood. While not expressly stated in text, we have two images that suggest Jing Yuan was present during the disaster. First is an image of the three weapons forged by Yingxing laying in the remnants of the disaster, and starful reverie is present. Second is a picture of Jing Yuan fighting Jing Liu, which is initially assumed to be their fight during a flash. However, the scenery instead reflects that of the sedition site, and their combat poses are also very different. This suggests that not only was Lieutenant Jing Yuan present at the sedition of Imbibe de Lune along with the other Cloud Knights that assaulted them, but that he may have fought the enraged Jing Liu, potentially to prevent her from murdering Yingxing and Danfeng after she dealt with the half-draconic abomination, but that's my speculation. About these events, Blade says,
He always understood the price better than any of us, yet he never spoke up, never did anything.
After the sedition of Imbibe de Lune, Jing Yuan read aloud his list of crimes. There were discussions about how to punish Danfeng. The Ten Lords Commission wanted to outright execute him, preventing him from being born anew, but the Yao Qing's High Elder Kelorm Venti bargained for Danfeng and pushed a strong case in his favour. Instead of execution, the parties agreed to spare him from permanent death, and instead put Danfeng through forced rebirth, where he could be regarded as a new being and his sins forgiven. Jing Yuan brought news of these negotiations to the imprisoned Danfeng, who refused to speak to him and anyone else who came to him. During this time, there is upheaval as Danfeng loyalists are executed by Cloud Knights, and their art that praises him is outlawed. The elegy we get to read contains the general arguing with Danfeng, who claims to want to attack the Divine Foresight once he's free, and then Danfeng cries out to Lan to send their divine arrow and shoot him. Though we have no proof if this actually happened or not, do note that one of Danfeng's crimes is formally listed as inciting rebellion. Before Danfeng undergoes this rebirth punishment, the lawful preceptors appeal to the 6 charioteers and ask if Danfeng can be temporarily released in order to repair the damaged seals of the arbor, because they could not be returned to their previous form despite their attempts. Jing Yuan comments that this is his first task as general, telling us he was promoted after the negotiations but before Danfeng's execution by the marshal. On this, Jing Yuan later tells Yan Qing that he never wanted to become general, and Huaiyan teaches him that being general is more than just warfare, and that he has to manage all of the affairs on the Luofu. 1 year after Danfeng's arrest, Jing Liu begins to become Mara-struck and is taken to the shackling prison, as is standard procedure. While there, she becomes fully Mara-struck and breaks out of the prison.
No sense of time, humanity waiting, a serious case. You should leave, Jing Yuan. Jing Yuan.
General Jing Yuan pursues her, remembering the promise he made to not hold back against her when this day comes. The animation implies that he defeated her when she stopped fighting back, but of course it's later revealed that he did not, and she was still out there all along. After Jing Liu leaves, Danfeng undergoes his exuviation punishment, but it was obvious that the charm used had been meddled with, and he was not properly reborn. In Jing Yuan's own words,
The senior Vidyadhara were sure of their scheme. But you cannot hide fire with paper.
As a result, Danfeng was not released and forgiven as previously bargained, but rather detained in the cold, dark, shackling prison, tortured and educated on the crimes of his past. As one of the 6 Arbiter generals, Jing Yuan participated in many battles with the denizens of the Abundance, including the invasion of Thalassa that the Yao Qing defends but is fated to lose, according to the Yuchui Master Diviner. Despite his subordinates urging him to not make decisions lightly and to consider how he will be remembered in history, Jing Yuan adopts a dismissive philosophy. History will make its own judgment, but I have no interest in my legacy. If I succeed, history will state that I am currently supremely confident in my masterful strategy. But if I fail, then history will state that I am currently neglecting my duties in wanton pleasure, preferring finches over my people. I have simply made my own decision. At some point, while wandering through the exalting sanctum, Jing Yuan stumbles across a merchant selling an unusually small house cat. Preferring small animals, Jing Yuan adopts the creature and puts Qingzi in charge of its care. As it turns out, this was a scam, and the small cat did not stay small. Instead, she grew into a massive lion with a large appetite, sparking rumors that the general had become a glutton and earning him a new title, the Glutton General. He found this one more impressive than the dozing general. Qingzi tells us a questionable story about Jing Yuan going to war for a few centuries, leaving her behind, only to return before she died. Though we don't know if this is true, the lion did exist as seen in his splash art and has an epitaph in the seat of Divine Foresight. Yanqing still finds her treasures buried in the ground many years later. At an unknown time, likely before the Third Abundance War 30 years ago, General Jing Yuan and the Ten Lords Commission decide to release Danfeng from his captivity. The lawful preceptors lash out at Jing Yuan for this, questioning if this was a consensus reached after discussions with the Six Charioteers, and if the marshal approved it. They say that if his actions stemmed from his past friendship with Danfeng, they would not accept such a sentimental gesture. They were going to inform the other high elders and seek to have him retract his order. Unbeknownst to them, the order was indeed already approved by the Ten Lords. Jing Yuan personally goes to the lightless depths of the shackling prison and beholds a radiance shining brighter than the sun, the gaze of Danfeng. The prisoner was escorted by the Cloud Knights onto an IPC ship, permanently exiled. At some point during this, Danfeng changes his name to Danheng and creates a new appearance that belongs to him. 30 years ago, disaster struck. The Borisan forces launched a surprising attack on the Fenghu. The Yuchui and the Luofu were close to the Fenghu, and it was their duty to give assistance. Divination revealed that they would meet a devastating defeat unless they took on a defensive position. Fu Xuan brought this information to a meeting between the generals, but they declined her proposal and opted to continue their attack, guaranteeing their loss despite the warnings. Fu Xuan watched the devastation before coming up with a blasphemous plan to use the Yuchui's Cloud Pair telescope to send an SOS signal to Lan's last known location. She presented this plan to Jing Yuan, gained his approval, and he told her that he would take the blame if the plan goes wrong. Fu Xuan executes her plan, and it works. Lan notices them and sends the arrow. In a blink, it collides with the Fenghu, destroying many delves and taking the lives of friend and foe alike. This shot killed the former Yaoqing general, Yukong's beloved Sai Yi, and many more. 900,000 fighter pilots died during that war, leaving less than 100,000 left. It's during this war that Fu Xuan becomes Yuchui's master diviner. Since then, he's promised to make Fu Xuan general of the Luofu 122 times, but claims she has a quick temper, and he won't retire until she has achieved better balance between her intellect and temper. After the war, Jing Yuan mysteriously acquired and decided to raise a baby Yanqing. He taught him swordsmanship and raised him as an apprentice, and though not formally adopted, Yanqing sometimes wonders if Jing Yuan was his father. After many years of training, Yanqing defeats 3 Borisan broodlords and sinks the Windweaver Cloudseezer fleet, earning him the title of General Jing Yuan's lieutenant despite his very young age. Yanqing's skills become so good that Jing Yuan doesn't have to show his martial prowess while Yanqing is around. During these peaceful times, we learn a bit more about his interests. Gwenyphen heard he enjoys street music performances, and Qingshui says he often listens to music with his eyes closed. But despite appearances, all is not well aboard the Luofu. Under his rule, the Vidyadhara are extremely upset for a multitude of reasons. Obviously, the preceptors are enraged, but that's not all. The housing economy is terrible, and because Vidyadhara lose their property when they rebirth, they have to go through a lot of nasty real estate paperwork and are discriminated against because they abandon their real estate after each rebirth. The Luofu tells the Vidyadhara that they have to provide 300 years, literally half of their lifespan, worth of health certificates and criminal conviction clearances to prove they won't suddenly go through hatching rebirth and leave the estate in a sudden limbo, something that is entirely out of their control. In comparison, on the Fenghu, reborn Vidyadhara are immediately granted free housing. To quote Hongjin, if you ask me, I'd say the Luofu, well, forget it. It's just not a place where you'd call home. We Vidyadhara are better off elsewhere. There are also the Vidyadhara that are extremely concerned by their permanently diminished numbers. leading to their inevitable extinction as they are continuously killed fighting wars for the Alliance. One of these Vidyadhara was inspired by Dan Heng's changes to the Transmutation Arcanum and has been conducting biological experiments alongside Sanctus Medicus in hopes of both mastering immortality and creating new Vidyadhara to replenish their lines. The Vidyadhara illegally smuggled arbor branches out of the depths of the Scale Gorge waterscape and delivered them to the Alchemy Commission for experimentation. Dan Xiu, the leader of the new branch of the Disciples of Sanctus Medicus, was the successor of the leader of these experiments. Having swapped allegiance after Lan's arrow killed her beloved friend, who was a medic in the Fenghu Hospital 30 years ago. Dan Xiu was a genius, and this team created the miracle of the Bloomborn Scion, though she suspected they would not be able to replicate it. Bai Lu was put into the care of the leader of this research, the kind voice she encounters in the Scale Gorge, and assigned servants to watch her every move. I have an hour-long series about the Bloomborn Scion if you want more details on this topic. Jing Yuan was understandably very suspicious of the appearance of a new High Elder and began subtle investigations, roaming to visit her periodically, likely to keep tabs on her. The Disciples of Sanctus Medicus even attempted to assassinate Jing Yuan, but were foiled by his lapdogs. They suspected there were spies amidst their ranks, and it's confirmed during the story quest that Cloud Knights do try to infiltrate Sanctus Medicus. In fact, even the Trailblazer attempts it. Unfortunately, Jing Yuan's investigations were going poorly. Dan Xiu had successfully conspired with the Destruction Emanator, Fantilia, to bring a Stellaron aboard the Luofu in order to activate the Ambrosial Arbor, empower her research, and let the Disciples take over the Luofu. The cooperation between Dan Xiu and the Preceptors meant she could easily have the Stellaron smuggled into the roots of the Arbor to execute this plan. Dan Xiu's work was truly flawless, and she would have succeeded at beating Jing Yuan, taking over the Luofu, and restoring immortality, if not for the intervention of Elio. Elio first sent Blade and Kafka to the Luofu. Then, Blade intentionally got arrested by the Cloud Knights and likely intentionally sent visions of this to Dan Heng through the telepathic connection. At the same time, Kafka appears as a hologram on the Astral Express and alerts us that if we don't head to Luofu right now, then half of the Luofu population will die. Everyone except Dan Heng votes to try and save them, and Dan Heng chooses to stay behind. He's exiled and has no interest in returning. But then, Dan Heng sees that they're heading down there to help Kafka rescue Blade, and he realizes that his nightmare of Blade is real and that he poses a threat to the Express crew. So, Dan Heng is forced to sneak onto the Luofu to save Welt, March, and the Trailblazer from Blade. If you're wondering how the Luofu wasn't able to predict this disaster with the Divination Commission, well, they actually did. Divine Foresight had predictions of an upcoming disaster that were ignored by her superiors. She'd been working there for 2 centuries, but after this prediction, Fu Xuan predicted that she would personally eject Foresight from the commission, so she did. Now Foresight works in a shop where she performs predictions for the player if we approach her. Understandably, Jing Yuan is deeply suspicious of the Astral Express crew, and we're assigned Ting Yuan to guide us around. He has no idea that Ting Yuan is actually Fantilia, who's infiltrated behind the scenes this deeply. Luojia and Jing Liu also show up around this time for unknown reasons, distracting from the Disciples of Sanctus Medicus. Fortunately for the Luofu, Kafka allows herself to be captured and have her mind read, informing Fu Xuan, and by extension Jing Yuan, about what is about to happen and the role that the members of the Express are supposed to play in preventing disaster, now and in the future. Following these visions, the Cloud Knights are more prepared to defend the Alchemy Commission as the Arbor blooms. We defeat Dan Xiu, and I feel kinda bad for her. She deserved victory at this point, honestly, and we head to the Scale Gorge. We meet back up with Dan Heng and the Stellaron Hunters. Blade fulfills his mission to reveal Dan Heng's true form. Jing Yuan is aware of their mission and lets them off the hook this time, and he's aware of Dan Heng's importance, so he proceeds to subtly blackmail him into helping them, knowing Dan Heng still doesn't want to help the Luofu, but he does want to help the Astral Express. The group reconvenes at the water's edge. The Astral Express does the last round of convincing, and Dan Heng agrees to split the waters so they can access the tree and stop Fantilia at the last second. All according to plan, and truly just because Elio wanted us to have the Luofu owe us a favour. Jing Yuan recognizes this and gives us the Jade Abacus so we can call him when it's time to repay their debt to us and to Elio. Following the main story, Jing Yuan revokes the Banishment Edict as Dan Heng's promised reward for helping them. Jing Yuan rejects the invitation from Penacony to attend their festival, for the best, really. And now we come to the current events of patch 2.4, where Jing Yuan is being investigated by General Huaiyan and General Fei Xiao under the marshal's orders, and Hu Lei, the most powerful Borisan leader, has broken out by infiltrating Borisan forces. Truly, Jing Yuan cannot catch a break, no wonder he's so sleepy all the time. Before I end the video, I want to address one more topic, and that's Lightning Lord. This entity is part of being lawful general, and was presumably given to him when he inherited the title after General Teng Xiao. The Lightning Lord spirit is one of the formidable spirits bestowed by Lan and wields great power. It's a common belief among fans that Jing Yuan is an emanator of the hunt, but it's not really how that works. Jing Yuan possesses the ability to summon an emanator through the authority of the general, but he himself is not an emanator. Besides, emanators need to have their power granted directly by the Eon, and we know Jing Yuan's position was confirmed by the Marshal, not Lan the Hunt. On that topic, I mentioned earlier that I think Jing Yuan might have confronted Jing Liu during the sedition, before he became general, yet in this scene he is controlling Lightning Lord. I think this is possible despite the fact that he was lieutenant at this time, because he says Lightning Lord is commanded by the authority of the general. And since we know it can be passed on, I think it's possible that he took it from Teng Xiao to use either temporarily or in his absence, since we have no clue what happened to Teng Xiao during this time period. On the topic of Teng Xiao, Fei Xiao says that Jing Yuan is the longest serving general of the Luofu, and this just does not seem to be true according to the timeline. Teng Xiao should have been general for over 1,000 years, because we see him wielding Lightning Lord during the attack on Songsheng 1,800 years ago, and again during the High Cloud Quintet era 800 years ago. I'm not sure if the writers just forgot about this, or if I'm missing something, but yeah, that's a thing. Please let me know how you think the upcoming story is going to go. There are so many possibilities and I honestly can't pick what is more likely. I'm hoping that Jing Yuan gets to leave the general position because he never wanted to be general anyway, and he was given 2 successors for a reason. But also, picture how scary Fu Xuan with Lightning Lord authority would be. I'd love to see Jing Yuan do something absolutely crazy, like join his master Jing Liu on her quest with Luoxia, or even become a synthirster and take us on an adventure into the Nihility to meet up with Bai Heng in the Abyss or something. He's a very empathetic and deeply caring person, and I'd love to see that put to use and challenged in the narrative. I don't know, Jing Yuan just needs to get out of the house, you know? Life is ephemeral and he should have an adventure. I don't know, those are just my crazy speculations, so don't take them too seriously. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video to help with the algorithm. See ya!